people have when they're looking for land is they've looked at real estate before. They know what a good house looks like. They might know what to look for in a good house. But when you're talking about buying land that you want to homestead on, live off grid or whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of things that you got to look for and evaluate to decide if that's a winner or not. And I'm not really looking for properties that are for large-scale commercial farms. I'm talking market gardens at best, small-scale, niche, regenerative agriculture. You're better off starting with all trees than pasture, because a tree takes a lifetime to grow and it takes an afternoon to take down. So you're far better off starting with trees, knowing that if you take some of them down, hey, you got firewood.
And good afternoon, everyone. As you see, the world's spinning in a different direction than we want it to go. Obviously, that time for solutions is more integral and needed than ever. Now, the solutions on how to get stocked up, prepped out, get your, things that you might need for more self-sufficiency or neighborhoods, and this sort of community aspect is one thing to think about. But another one I get hit up a lot with too, and my guest today, Curtis Stoney, we've talked before. He's been on the program, a favorite. Many of you know him already from the field. He also has been talking with me, and we agreed, what about the land? So that's a big thing. A lot of other people are talking about the land. I get messages every week saying, where's the safe spot? I do it in a more general sense, say, look back in history, and, the area where I live has been continuously inhabited for 10,000 years. I like to look at the more ancient Mississippian cultures and see, how they had, their legends had been in where their safe zones were as well along the Mississippi River, or they're east or west of that, like continuous habitation zones based on historical fact of people living in areas is, the way I try to go with it. But, in today's world, where are the best places to live in the United States that are going to be able to generate agriculture, even in cold times during the winter? You don't want to have too long of a season. Yeah, you don't want to be coastal down in Florida where you can grow all year round, but, a 5-foot wave is going to sweep across the entire state. There's some method to the madness, and really it is kind of a Rubik's Cube to find the best places. So Curtis, I appreciate you joining me. We wanted to talk about land assessment, like really just getting on the land, and I'll let you take it from here, because I think it's going to be a blend of all these solutions, including finding and staking out your perfect spot, so then others will come and join on with you there. So thanks for joining today. I know we're going to have a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, happy to be here. And always, we share a lot of probably similar audience members, people that watch your stuff, watch my stuff, and vice versa. But yeah, I mean, we're coming into a period of time where there's going to be some economic turmoil. I mean, you've been talking about this for a long time, and I have too. And it seems like the accumulation of events are bringing us to a perfect kind of tipping point where we've got, political corruption, out in the open political corruption. We've got geopolitical issues with proxy wars and such. We've got this sort of brewing, sort of cultural, political divide in the United States, where you've got, some people think there's civil war. I know the elites would love there to be civil war. That would really benefit them. And we've got, of course, the big economic stuff that you're talking about a lot lately in your stuff, but, things like metals and other assets that have intrinsic value. I mean, the asset that has the most amount of intrinsic value that you can have is land. And you're on land yourself. And because if you have land, then you can start stocking the different capital resources that are outside of the financial capital. So the government would love you to just have you in the financial capital world, because then they can throttle you on interest rates and inflation and this, that, and the other. Or of course, you can start putting in water resources, which is another form of biological capital. You can start shaping your land, storing food, storing tools, things. You can start actually building real wealth that when we see a dollar collapse or some kind of market collapse, you've got stuff that has use, and you can't really do much of that unless you have land. And so I've put this course together, which I know is going to help hopefully millions of people get on the land. And what I've been consulting for people forever. As long as I've known you, even longer, I've been consulting on farms, on homesteads, and helping people get on the land. And one of the biggest challenges people have when they're looking for land is they've looked at real estate before. They know what a good house looks like. They might know what to look for in a good house. But when you're talking about buying land that you want to homestead on, live off grid or whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of things that you got to look for and evaluate to decide if that's a winner or not. And for that is over most people's heads. And I've been working as a consultant for years. People will send me real estate listings, they'll pay me $400 an hour, send me a handful of listings and say, can you just spend a couple hours evaluating these and then tell us what are the winners and losers and why and whatnot. And so I've done that for a long time. And I've traveled around the world too and seen homesteads and farms and all kinds of different geographies and climates. And I've basically, what I've done is I've consolidated down my knowledge of land into a course that takes you through 52 property assessments. We evaluate a property in almost every single US continental state, as well as almost every Canadian province, zones 3 through 9. So basically covering the entire climate region of the US, except the southern tip of Florida, which is the only tropical place in the US, and evaluating properties in all kinds of different conditions. And so what I thought I could help people with today, just to deliver value on its own, sure, I got a great course that you might be interested in, but I'd like to just kind of lay out a framework in which I use to evaluate land. And this will be valuable to people if they're looking. And I'm sure you'll have kind of questions in between, but basically, when it comes to looking for a property that you want to settle down on, the first thing you have to understand is your context. So David DuByne's got a different context than me, possibly, maybe not, but possibly. You might have different needs that you want to achieve on your land, whereas somebody like me. So what somebody wants to do is the first thing is make basically sort of a mission statement or a synopsis of what you envision living on the land looking like and what you imagine doing and what you'd like to accomplish. That's number one. Then the next thing is, and I won't just go on forever because I'll let you interject wherever, but once you have that foundation of what you're looking for, the next thing you want to do, if you find a place that seems interesting to you, the first thing you need to do is look for threats. Is this around any big ag? You pull the lens back on Google Earth Pro, which is what I use. And we could even talk about some kind of like no-go zones in the US when I show people like where I would recommend going and where I would not recommend going and why. But when you pull the lens back to that, I like the 60-mile view. So I pull out a 60-mile radius of an area. And so property in the center, pull out 60 miles. What's in that area? What are the socioeconomics of the area? Where are the cities? Where are the highways? You don't want to be on any main veins. You don't want to be on any interstates. You don't want to be visible from busy roads. That's for sure. And then looking at that stuff first. What are the demographics? Are you 20 miles outside of Memphis, Tennessee? I hope not, because if you are, that's a serious liability. Like things like that. That's where I start. Then when I get into the property, I go climate, geography, water. Circle back at socioeconomics. We go access and circulation. We look at soil. We look at zones of use. We look at even the aesthetics of the property. Basically go through this litany of things and evaluate a property based on each of those elements. And that is how the lens in which people should use to see if a place is worthwhile or not.
Yeah, I'll agree with a bunch of those. And, I would like you to keep going on the 52. Now, for myself, when I came, I was also looking for water. Now, I had been told that well water, now not particular here in East Tennessee, but well water in many areas, like you referenced in the ag zone, is actually more polluted than what you would consider rainwater coming down from above to irrigate the plants, because there's been so much runoff and so much buildup and contaminant in the aquifer that actually drinking that well water is way more unhealthy than just drinking rainwater, which baffled me in some areas, though. Again, it's the assessment areas.
Yep.
And the trees for me were a big one too. A, building material, B, warmth, C, food production, natural foraging, wild foraging in addition. So, taking like an assessment of the trees that are within the area. Got pine,
Big
great.
time.
Got the hardwoods, great. Got the nuts, and also looking to see what types of the soils. Again, I want to produce a lot of fruit. A lot of fruit means a lot of tradables, and a lot of alcohol can be produced. So for me, my main thing about producing all the fruit with the 120 fruit trees was alcohol production, as well as the tradables. But,
You
so
can
those
store
longer
it.
term goals, I had already put
Yep.
that out a couple of years ago, knowing it's going to take a couple, 3 years or so before the fruit really starts rolling in, where you're getting bushels and bushels, and you can afford to have that extra beyond what you could trade or sell to be able to then produce alcohol with.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's my 2 cents worth. Those 52
Well,
categories, I
yeah.
hadn't broken it down that far, but yeah, I'm
I
all
mean,
ears.
I can just elaborate on even what you're talking about there. So the way I evaluate a property is I use what's called the 11 scales of permanence. And so you might be familiar with P.A. Yeoman. He was sort of the Renaissance man, farmer, engineer who came up with what's known today as the yeoman's plow, which is used for key line design, where the idea is you bring water out from the valleys into the ridges, because the ridges are your optimal zone for growing because they're more exposed, they get more sunlight, but they don't hold water very well, generally speaking, without some intervention, or sometimes they do, depending on the soil, of course, infinite variables. But that's what P.A. Yeoman is known for. And he came up with, at the time, it was the 8 scales of permanence. And then a couple guys, Dave Jackie and Eric Townsmere, expanded it to 11. And so we use this framework. So it's climate, landform, water, socioeconomics, access, circulation, vegetation, wildlife, microclimate, buildings and infrastructure, zones of use, soil, and then aesthetics and experience. And so the way these work, David, is that when you start at the top, this is why they're called scales of permanence, is because they all have a slightly different weight. Climate being number one. If your climate sucks, everything else is potentially affected, and it's the hardest thing to change. Like you can change the climate in some way. You can create microclimates, you can use greenhouses, you can have vegetation and wildlife in the form of trees and stuff like you do that give you a climate advantage. But climate is number one. And so when we evaluate something, again, first, your context is the framework that you're going to build the foundation of your search. And second, you look for a threat. Once you pass through those doors, you go through these scales of permanence. And so evaluating each of these is super important. And what you mentioned, though, with vegetation and wildlife, that was the scale of permanence that you mentioned, is it's so valuable. And what I always tell people is, and I'm saying this for years when I evaluate properties for clients, is I'll say, trees, you always want to start with trees. It's better to start with trees than to not. So even as a farmer myself, and I'm not really looking for properties that are for large-scale commercial farms. I'm talking market gardens at best, small-scale, niche, regenerative agriculture. You're better off starting with all trees than pasture, because a tree takes a lifetime to grow, and it takes an afternoon to take down. So you're far better off starting with trees, knowing that if you take some of them down, hey, you got firewood, you got some kind of resource you can use, and so that's clearing the land, which pays. So it's better to start with that. And so many people don't realize how important it is. Like you alluded to a lot of it there. Firewood, any kind of resource from the vegetation in there, which vegetation houses wildlife. So where you have trees, you have wildlife. You have hunting, right? You have wild boar. I mean, I've got on my property, our property is not really set up for animal agriculture. It does well for chickens and maybe goats, but it doesn't do great for cows or sheep or anything like that. But I have a limitless amount of wildlife. So right now, the turkeys are in season. So I've got 30-pound wild turkeys crawling all around my property outside of my main fence, but I can hear them. They're going. I got deer and moose all winter, huge animals. So there's vegetation and wildlife is super key, but without a bunch of these other categories that make a good piece of land, sometimes your property just won't have vegetation and wildlife. And that often comes down to bad geography, limited water, limited soil. These things create vegetation, right? If you have good geography with topography where you've got valleys, you've got some ridges, you've got a variation to your landscape in combination with soil, that's a perfect place to get a lot of vegetation as well as microclimates. And a microclimate is another thing that we look for to evaluate a property. Is we say, hey, just a flat piece of dirt in Nebraska has no microclimate, right? You're just exposed, you're just well out in the open. You get into sort of small mountainous areas like in eastern Tennessee, even parts of Arkansas, parts of even something like the Ozarks in Missouri. Interesting topography. You get the benefit of microclimates because you get cool, wet areas down in valleys and treat areas. You get lit and exposed areas on ridges, and you've got that variation. And if you're looking at land in the long term, like you are, planting hundreds of trees and all this, you're thinking long term. You want your land to be sort of geographically diverse as possible, to a limit. Of course, there can be, geography that's too extreme. Certainly we see that in the mountains of British Columbia where I live. But, a combination of all these things is really what makes a good property in the long run.
Another thing about the forest that I have started doing is harvesting the soil humus from up there in the forest. Because, if supply chains break down as anticipated, where the dollar might hyperinflate, pretty good chance of that, your access to a lot of goods are going to be curtailed. And it's going to cost you 5 times more, 3 times more. Even if it doubles, you're still going to think twice about buying a lot of items.
Big time.
So when we need to pot out our plants and get starters up, and we're under grow lights now, we're just waiting for this last week or so. We really want to make sure April 15th, and we'll put everything out. What if I don't have any potting soil? Well, I got the forest up there that if I dig down, I have huge layers, and I got more than 20 acres. 18 of it is forested pretty well. So let's say 17 acres is full forest. I did clear out a bunch of the pasture out and going up the hill there, but it's pretty much limitless because you as one person going in and digging with the shovel, digging out, even if you bring out buckets and wheelbarrows and using the Ranger 4-wheeler to take out stuff, you're still going to just make a micro dent in that entire ecosystem.
It is. And that's why, in my opinion, human beings were meant to live on land I'm not proposing some form of agrarian communism, but I mean, really too, if you look at the world population, there's enough land to give everybody a few acres and fit them all into Texas, something like that. So human beings, and this is why the elite don't want you living on land, because when you're living in cities and everything's an externality and everything's compartmentalized, everything's limited. And so then they can make excuses to throttle you and keep you poor. Whereas when you're living on land, as you just illustrated, there is literally limitless. I mean, I'm on 40 acres. And I've got 30 acres of standing timber, all softwood, some hardwood, mostly softwood. But I literally have a lifetime of firewood. I wouldn't be able to thin the forest enough to use it all. And by the time I run out to the point where I don't have any more deadfall or snags to cut down, 30 years have gone by and new trees have regenerated. And so it's where you get, I love the idea of traditional family on multi acres. I think if you're really going to homestead, do regenerative agriculture homesteading, you really got to be on at least 10 acres. Depending on the topography and the way the property is laid out, that number can vary. In some climates in the US, you probably need to be on 50 acres to get access to that kind of abundance that you're talking about, particularly as you move towards, the Rockies and you get into these BSK climates of, Moab, Utah, or, even just thinking of Western Nebraska, moving into Montana, Wyoming. Those places are pretty tough climates and there's not a lot of vegetation in there. High elevation areas of Colorado, you need to be on larger acreage to take advantage of that. Or you could be on a small acreage as long as you're backed up to state land or something like that, where you can access the wild. Because I think it's a perfect ratio to have 95% of your property is wild. And then that, you really only need, in my opinion, 5 acres is enough to do all your homesteading with animals, all the animals you need, all the vegetables, all the tree crops, nuts, cash crops for as you said, alcohol, some kind of trade surplus, and some kind of storage crops that you can use as feed for animals over the winter. All you need is 5 acres. But if you want to take advantage of the wild part of the property, which now gives you firewood, wild medicinals, things like this, or animals for hunting and such, you got to get into the bigger acre. And so I would say, if you've got 20 acres and you got 5 acres that's cleared, buildings, infrastructure can go in there, but the rest of that's wild, that's like a perfect case scenario. And hopefully bigger is always better. Nothing wrong with being on 160 acre quarter section and only living on 5 of it. More wild, the better.
Yeah, speaking of the nuts, trying to get into hazelnuts as a row crop this year. I hadn't put those down. It was hard to find. And the Amish are starting to sell plants again right now. Their Amish stores have just opened last week. So
nice.
Thinking about what are commercial varieties, what are not, because when different types of nuts coming down, yeah, you're going to get handsfuls and buckets fulls, but it's not going to be enough to trade. It's just for your own consumption. And the big thing about making maps around for the different types of seasons for the forageables, right now we have so many greens that are out in the yard. We did buy some sheep, by the way. I got 1 ewe and two lambs. They're twins. And what we're planning to do is the twins are 2 boys. So we're going to raise them up. And then Jonathan, the guy down at the Amish farm that we bought them from, is going to swap us out a female that's not related in lineage to the mother and the twins. And then we're going to start to breed those. And again, we're not going to slaughter them ourselves. We're going to trade them off. So what's your value for 120-pound sheep at the end of the year? 110-pound, all on grasses that we have here.
It's great. And the smart thing about doing it that way too, David, sorry to interrupt, but the smart thing about doing that too is that you save yourself a huge amount of the work. Raising the animals is one thing. Slaughtering and finishing the animals is a whole other can of worms. Selling livestock that way is an incredibly smart way to do it, because then you can get into other types of avenues. If you don't have to deal with that part of the job, you can multitask so many other things at the same time. So yeah, good on you for doing that.
Yeah, we visited Joel Salatin's farm up. It's
nice.
about 5 hours
driving.
I saw that. Yeah, from here we went up to Virginia up there and what we've decided to do is use the sheep to help clear out our really very difficult to maintain areas in the backfield, because we have some creeks that come down when it rains, and they're always running, but they grow so fast, it's really difficult to keep them in check. So to try to use those sheep also as grazer cleaners, in addition to helping cut and supplement the foods that, because we got some 12% horse feed that we've been having them on in addition to the wild greens that they're grazing. But when it comes down into wintertime, we want to make sure we have extra everything for them. Feed is getting so expensive. Animals are going to get your meat source is going to get super expensive just based on the feed input.
Is. Oh man.
Any way you can cut that feed cost down, and we're actually sprouting barley in the trays, in tilted trays, to try to get that root mass and barley grass up to save again on some of the feed costs.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, that doing that alone, I mean, I ferment and sprout and grow. So for my chickens, I do meat birds and layers right now. And I sprout I sprout and grow almost like a microgreen. Essentially, it's like wheatgrass. I grow their feed, but then I also ferment their mash. And so I get 3x value out of their mash by fermenting it. And I get about the same value, 3x value, by doing the sprouting and growing fodder as you described. It's huge. And, nobody's going to be able to get rid of their feed right away. You're raising animals to get to a point where you've got that all closed loop takes some serious time and infrastructure, because you need to be able to do crops. So it's one thing to have a garden to grow, your veggies and your storage crops for the family. But if you want to have animals over winter and keep them alive, and you want to do it self-sustainably, as they say, you need to have a good amount of field dedicated to crop, where you're going to grow sorghum, corn, amaranth, maybe some wheat, I don't know, some other things that chickens can eat and you can store. That's really what you got to do. And that's why being on bigger land is ultimately better.
In a way, a cost-cutting way here, my brother-in-law has a four-wheeler. He's got a Polaris. So I bought all the attachments from Black Boar, and we're able to do a lot more space in a very small amount of time, because tractors, I don't have 25 grand to drop on a tractor right now. And that's not even a very large one. That was like a 39 or something. We need something bigger. But to be able to run, a quarter acre in a morning and be able to plant it out and get it ready when a rainstorm's coming in. I mean, you do that by hand with a rototiller, you're there all day even trying to break through the soils, instead of running a disc up and down and then, throwing your seed out there. The easier, the better. And like, was that Sudan sorghum grass? Also going to try to get that this year to see, just for the green
Yeah,
it,
me
but
too. Yeah.
scaling up a little bit on the machinery too is going to help you with that. But
Oh,
we're
for
coming into
sure.
a time again. These used farm machines that you could probably attest better than myself. I go to some of the auctions and take a look at what people have for sale. It is ridiculous,
Dude, are
actually.
you kidding me? So I bought,
Yeah, right
I've
here I
got,
got the Farmers Exchange book I was looking at
yeah,
right
yeah.
here. But
I
the
get this. I get the same thing up
oh, do
here,
you?
and
Yeah, tractors are
and
ridiculous in
oh,
price.
it's so I run two machines. Well, I got a number of machines, but my two main machines I got a skid steer, I got a Kubota SSB, and then I've got a Kubota mini excavator. It's like the larger size mini excavator, and that both those machines, they're almost 2 years old. Well, one's 2.5 years old, the other's 1.5 years old. They're both worth more now than I paid for them. So I could literally sell those machines today. This is the going rates up here. Used with, my skid steer's got at least 300 hours on it now. My mini excavator maybe on 100. I can sell those machines for more than I paid for them. Now think about that for a second. And if you want to get a new one, get in line. Good luck. Some of these machines you're waiting 6 months to get them, and so people will just are buying them up like crazy. So yeah, I mean, this is a thing too, is talking about assets that you can have. I mean, if you don't have land, you can't store a tractor. Where are you going to put it? In your garage, in your suburban home? Like this is why getting land going into this new world order paradigm that we're marching towards is going to be your biggest refuge. And then, of course, ultimately networking with people in your area to have those trade networks. So, David's got an extra 100 gallons of alcohol that stores, that preserves, that holds its value. That's a form of currency. That's a form of money, a real money that can be exchanged. And, unless you have land, you just can't do these things.
Yeah, and the alcohol, just for those out there listening, it's not just for drinking. That's the byproduct of really what I want. I want the medicines out of the 4 shots.
Cleaning. Absolutely.
Yeah, like cleaners and medicinals as well. Like if the government comes down and says you are not allowed to take an apple and turn it into rubbing alcohol, that we have a huge problem at that point. That is the most basic thing.
It'll be hard for them to do that in the US, but yeah.
Yeah. But they're trying, okay, I'm running with my friend's distillery license because they got a full distillery, but they do corn. They contract grow for their corn. They want an original heirloom species on that. But the alcohol in the middle, that's great. But I'm thinking more like tinctures as well. Not the drinking is okay. That's what we've been brought up with from all the advertisements. But think about all of the other uses for alcohol, and especially the tinctures. Some of these medicinals only come out once a year. Now, how are you going to store that?
Yeah, exactly.
We've been doing this for thousands of years. I'm just trying to reverse the clock and go back 3,000 years in time and see how people survived and lived. You know what? It's very remarkable because the stuff they were doing in the 1850s is very similar. So I'm thinking, just jump another in 150 years and we'll just repeat that.
Oh yeah. I mean, the cool thing about right now, in a way, is that where it's like the cliche, we're in the best and worst of times, but it's kind of like you can still see that. So there's Mennonite communities all over the world. There's all these Mennonite Germans that are down in South America. They live as simply can be. There's Quakers, there's Mennonites in the US, there's Amish, right? Like there's people that have been doing this for a very long time. And that information is fairly available. We're fortunate that we still have the benefits of this internet that we're communicating on now. Hopefully lasts a little while longer so that we can get our message out and then get it out of the way before all haywire breaks loose. But you can learn this stuff. But again, it comes back to finding the right land. And that is the biggest challenge that people are going to face. Because here's the deal. Is when these equity markets and things like this start to they're already gone sideways, but until they really start hammering, there's going to be a mad dash to buy up land. And so there's going to be a lot of people that are going to go and seize those opportunities. You're going to be competing with your brothers and sisters, but ultimately you're going to be competing with BlackRock. You're going to be competing with the big banks, and their motto is you'll own nothing and be happy. And the way they're going to do that is not necessarily by jackboots coming and seizing your land. It's going to be just by throttling the market and pinching you out. And so we're going to move into a time, I think fairly soon, where there's going to be a lot on the market at bargain basement prices, but it's going to be a mad dash to get it. And I wouldn't be surprised if the banks are going to be using AI or things like that to buy these pieces of land. And so people need to move fast. So that's why I built this course to show people how to evaluate land, watch me do it 52 times and learn all these takeaways so you can get out there when the time comes and make it happen fast. Because it's going to go. I mean, even during the COVID lockdowns, when I bought, I was a COVID buyer. The realtors called us COVID buyers. There was all these people that were getting out of the cities on a mad dash, selling their shitty condos in the cities, and then getting out and buying land. And we were competing. It was so competitive. It was insane. And I discovered in my search, because I'm pretty good at getting to know people. I ask questions. I talk to realtors. I try to always get a sense of what's actually going on in the real market, not just what's on the numbers on the screen on the internet or the analytics. I actually like to get a street sense of what's going on. And there was realtors telling me, because I looked at a number of properties where I was like, okay, I want that. I'm ready to make an offer on that. I could tell it was so good. And I kept getting beat to the punch on the offers. I started to get to know a couple of these realtors. I'm like, who keeps getting me here? And it's like, well, to be honest, there's a couple numbered corporations that are going around British Columbia right now and pretty much buying up anything that looks okay. And these properties were bought and they're just sitting there. There's nothing being done with them. Nobody's moving in. There's no infrastructure going on. They're just bought and they're sitting there. And so that's going to happen again. And when we see the signal of the prices go down, because there's a lot in the market right now, the prices are sitting there. They've been there. I mean, I profiled hundreds of, I looked through hundreds of properties to find the 52 that I made for this course. I looked at hundreds because I wanted to find properties that were worth evaluating, not just like losers that there's nothing to learn from, but a property where there's a few major lessons to draw out with each one. And I looked at hundreds, and I'm telling you, 1/3 of the properties I looked at were at 200 days or more on the market. The other third were at 100 days or more. And the other third were just past 52, which is the average days on the market in the United States. And so that's a pretty clear signal to me that there's a lot sitting on the market and nobody's buying it. And so as soon as there's some more disruption in the market, you're going to see bargain basement prices.
Yeah, and you got to think about connectivity too. You just mentioned internet. Like, how far out is too far out? Because there was one piece of property that we looked at that was really nice. It was nice. It was up on the top of not at the exact peak, but on top of the mountain. But the drive out of there, it was seriously on a hairpin curve, 35, 40 minutes. And I'm thinking, it was in rattlesnake country up there too, where you start to get a higher elevation, a little rockier. I was like, man, You get bit by a rattlesnake on your gas pedal foot, you're not making it out of here alive. And you're going to need somebody to come and help you drive you down, because you're not going to drive yourself down. You'll crash off the side of the mountain with being bit up and your legs starting to swell up. And you're like, you're not. No. So for me, there was also that fine line between far enough out and the safety, along with being still connected, because I do work online here too. So I was trying to find that happy medium. And just as we moved in here, they didn't have internet out here until the very months that I moved in. And they're like, oh yeah, we're expanding out all through so at least the internet companies have understood that the COVID buyers all wanted internet to move out. So they did the service and expanded it out right into the further afield. But again, our cell signal, terrible down here, because originally when they first started putting the towers in, all the companies were renting and co-spacing each tower. But now the leases have run out and it's a single company, single tower now. So just the reception's horrible. When they're trying to get you to upgrade and do all these things, I'm like, I need to make a phone call and I can't, So that's got to be another variable there, connectivity in terms of like really safety. A serious farm accident, Curtis, man, if something goes wrong on a farm and you get seriously injured, you don't need an hour to drive out of somewhere, because you need to be out quick and getting somewhere where you can get some care on that. So
yeah, well, not only this, David, it's when you're building a homestead, you need a lot of resources to start. And so if you're too far out in the sticks, you're commuting multiple hours per trip a few times a week. That's a real drag. So there's certainly a good balance between being out of the way and being clear of any disaster zones. And then there's that socioeconomic risk. I thought, which might be kind of cool for your audience to we could geek out on something if you're okay with it, is if you let me share my screen, I'll pull up Google Earth and we could talk about no-go zones in the US. So we could look at, if I was going to homestead and I was just looking for places to for properties, I'm going to add some filters on Google Earth Pro, and it's going to totally change your search. And this is what I do in my course that's called Finding the Perfect Homestead Property. And David will have a link here, guys, if you're interested in. I'm willing to give away everything in this course for free as far as the foundation of the content, the procedures. I'll show you some of those today. The value in my course is me going through 52 consults, about 25 hours of content, and just seeing in repetition me do this over and over again. And that's a fast way to learn. So I'll open up Google Earth and we'll look at the US, and we'll talk about some places to consider, places not to consider. And David has a link here, folks, that if you follow that link, you'll be also supporting him. But it's an early bird discount for the course. So the early bird will be available from the 15th to the 18th, and it'll be $300. And then after that, it'll go up to 500. But I made the course cheap because I just want as many people to benefit from this information as possible. I mean, I used to charge $400 an hour for consulting. So even an hour of consulting with me is going to cost you more than the course. So I know the value is there, but I'm going to open up Google Earth here and kind of geek out. And this will be kind of fun because I've listened to your show for a long time, and my wife and I both listen to your show, and we've heard you talk about stuff like this. And so I think your audience will kind of find this neat. So can you see my screen?
Yeah, sure can. I'd like to follow along with you too. And then, see if, I'll throw my eye on there. And then, we just were on the call here. We didn't talk beforehand about anything. I'm just curious if I see the same thing you do, or if I see something different.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is one thing I do when let's imagine you're living in some, shithole liberal city, and you want to get out, and you're looking at the continental United States, and you're going, well, I could go in a lot of directions. I know I want to get out of here. And maybe you've got the convenience that you can make a living online, and you can kind of pick a place. Where do you start? Well, the one place I would consider starting is politics. So those are the red states. I could have put Arizona in there because we all know who won that election, but I didn't. I just went with the red states. And I would say, generally speaking, that's going to be a better start. And I probably don't need to get into why with your audience, but there's just generally going to be more freedom there. Places that were less crazy during the lockdowns and all that. That's generally speaking the red states. So starting with that, I'll take that filter off for a second, and I'll add a filter of, let's look at climate risk. So a big climate risk for a big portion of the United States is Tornado Alley. That's Tornado Alley. And this is a broad look at Tornado Alley because it's kind of just the whole thing. If you really want to get into the details, yes, there's more parts of Nebraska that aren't so bad. There's parts of Kansas that aren't so bad. You need to look at the details. But for me, if I was looking at broad strokes, I'd just rather avoid it altogether. And I know some people are going to chime in and say, well, I live in this part of Kansas. We never had a hurricane. It's like, or tornado. Okay, fair enough. This is just broad. I took all the data and just drew a big line around it and made it as one zone. There's going to be different hot zones in there. So I'd say, okay, forget Tornado Alley. Why risk it? With all the geoengineering and all the stuff they're doing right now, why risk it? Then I would say hurricane zones. Don't want to be in a hurricane zone. The same thing here. Volatile. You can lose everything on your property in a night. So avoid it. Avoid the hurricane zones. Another one I would avoid is the U.S. Mexican border. If you can avoid it, avoid it. And then, of course, again, you can and then apply your political filter on top of there. And then where are you going to go? You're looking at some of these states. Like, there's a lot of good stuff in Missouri. There's a lot of good stuff in Arkansas. There's certainly parts of Missouri I don't like. There's parts that are nice. Same with Arkansas. Texas is great for a lot of reasons, but it's actually quite challenging in Texas to find good properties that aren't in these areas. You're pretty much limited to this area around San Antonio. I mean, yeah, Fort Worth, there's parts of these that don't get tornadoes. I get it. But if you want to just have broad strokes and avoid it, these are some filters that I use where I would want to go. And then, of course, another one, if you're worried about nuclear Armageddon, I'm not really, frankly, I'm not worried about it at all. But you could draw a 600-mile radius around DC and say, well, I could avoid that area too. I frankly don't think we're going to see nuclear war at all. But that could be another filter you'd look at. And if we just had all those filters on there, where are we looking? We're looking in Montana, Idaho. Tough to find good places in Idaho because everybody from California and around has moved there. Wyoming, tough with the climate. Sorry, that's my kids having fun in the greenhouse. New Mexico's tough climate. I mean, look at this. Where are we? I mean, where is premium areas as far as growing and climate? This area here is very prime in the United States. Again, if the politics, if you're okay with the politics, that will be really where it goes. So, I mean, we're talking about this sort of, I don't know, do they call that the heartland? What's the heartland in the US?
Yeah, the heartland includes all of the grow zones, which you consider the Midwestern grow belt and the Midwestern grain belts, like the heartland of America, all the way from Minnesota straight down through Oklahoma, down to the Gulf, and then over as well through Michigan, Indiana, that sort of middle Kentucky, Tennessee, straight down, like the heartland, and Nebraska would be included, tips of that as well. Like the grain, without the grains and without the food, we don't have a civilization. Please, everybody understand that. The base for anything in a civilization or a society begins with food or not. How many times through history has it collapsed? Now, Curtis, the reason I wanted to say that is one of my layers that you may or may not have on there is archaeological sites. Like to think about the changes in climate over a vast amount of time and archaeological areas that were continuously inhabited for multi-centuries, and you could see the breaks and the ebbs and flow of population movement or migration, there's none. That's not a place. Yeah. If there's no archaeological sites up there, that means either they're completely wiped out by the glaciers, or the climate was never good enough and there was like a million better spots, so they never settled there.
Yeah. And that's a really good observation. Yeah, that's a really, really good observation. But I mean, we're talking about places to be in the US. The nice thing about some of these states, like you can talk about this sort of southeastern Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, into Louisiana, Mississippi. I found some beautiful spots in Mississippi. Tennessee's got tons of great spots too. In fact, one of the best properties I looked at was in Tennessee. But this is a really good area of the United States. If you can live with the politics, another absolute gem in the United States is northeastern Washington. Unbelievable climate, zone 6, some zone 7. This area here, if you can live with being somewhat remote and you don't mind going into Canada to get some things, this is some of the best properties in the United States as far as value for what's on the land, climate, infrastructure, water. Northeastern Washington is incredible. Yes, Washington is a blue state. However, in the country, it's very conservative, and it's just sparse. There's so few people out here. I mean, literally parts in this part of the United States, we're up here just north of the US. Most of Canada lives within 100 miles of the US border. Properties that are just south of the border, British Columbia is where I live, and properties are ridiculous. You can buy the exact same equivalent in northeastern Washington for a third to a quarter of what we would pay, adjusted by the dollar, in northeastern Washington. And there's no income tax in Washington either. And I just found an unbelievable opportunity there. All of this, when you get in the US, these climates, all the brown stuff, this is what's called a BSK climate. So I use a filter called the Köppen-Geiger climate classification system, which basically shows it groups climate into 5 categories: equatorial, which is tropical; arid, which is desert; warm temperate, which is all the green stuff and variations of that; boreal, which is mountains, softwood trees; and then polar. We looked at everything from arid to temperate to boreal because there's so few equatorial in the United States and there's no polar. But really, I mean, in general, this green zone is called a CFA climate. It's a temperate, warmer winters, not cold, but cool maybe. You still get a winter, but you get hot, humid summers. These are just such beautiful areas. I like cold climates too. I have a soft spot in me for cold climates because I'm adapted to them and I like them in many ways. But this is another layer that I use that just tells you so much. And if you go on Wikipedia, you type in the Köppen-Geiger climate classification system, you get this great encyclopedia that describes all of these. So each of these colors represents a different climate. So for example, this is called the DFA climate, the dark purple. And this is you get a winter, but it's great agricultural growing, not super cold winters, but you get snow and you can get big weather events, but good amount of precipitation, but gets a winter. You get up into the DFBs, which is, I live in a DFB. This is, your predominant boreal climate that you see in North America. So cold winters, but hot and dry summers. Actually very good for crops. And this is why all the agriculture in Canada happens in DFB climates. So it's actually very good for agriculture. DFC, DFD, too cold. But you look at some of these other subcategories, like a DSA or a DSB, you get some of these parts. Like the DSB is a really cool climate zone. Northeastern Washington, Zone 6, USDA Zone 6. You basically get a winter, less snow. In these areas, you might get 40, 50 inches of snow, but you'll also get about 40, 50 inches of rain in the growing season. Whereas in the DFBs, you get 100 inches of snow and only about 20 inches to 40 inches of rain in the growing season. So, they all have their pros and cons, but then you get in, these are the areas I generally would advise people to avoid, is the BSK climates. These areas, there are parts in BSK climates, this yellow stuff, and you can even just, by unclicking it, you can just see these climates. They're just the areas where there's no green stuff. Basically, there's the BSK. That's your cold desert. It's hot and dry as hell in the summer, but it's cold and dry in the winter. It means there's just no water. And yes, parts of Arizona have massive aquifers, but it's not sustainable because the big ag, you zoom into ag country in Arizona and New Mexico, and you just see this kind of crap, right? This is not sustainable in any way.
The circles
these aquifers
out on the
are going to just tap out. Yeah, and you even get in some of these areas, you get oil and gas development. Especially you get into parts of Texas and in Canada, definitely in Alberta, massive oil and gas development where you've just got groundwater, and it's not even hard to figure out. You just go in here, look at this. You can see these pads, the oil and gas development.
Those are fracking pads.
Fracking pads, exactly. And so this is contaminated groundwater. You don't want to be near that. That's a threat. If I was analyzing property for somebody, it's the first thing I look at is I just go in. Let's just put a point down here just for the hell of it. Let's just zoom in somewhere random Alberta here. And then, okay, let's zoom in. The first thing I do is, okay, so here's our property. And this is a 160 acre quarter section. This is the way land is divided up in Alberta for the most part, and actually most of Canada. And so there's our 160 acre quarter section. We've got a nice little parcel here where the main homestead activity is.
Those are two pads in conjunction of those. Are those fracking well pads there? Or are those just driveways?
That looks like fracking right there. You see the tank? Yeah, that's fracking. So I would say, probably don't want to be near that. There's another fracking there. You look at Nebraska, and we can even do that right now. It's almost the same thing. So this is just such a massive part of North America in general, whether you're Canada or US, doesn't really matter. You get down into these big ag areas here, coming into Nebraska. I'll just kill this filter here, and you're going to get the same thing. And if it isn't fracking that's your issue, you're surrounded by big ag, right? You're surrounded by center pivots, huge wheel line infrastructure. And as soon as you see stuff like this, this is called a wheel line. So that's large. That's expensive infrastructure for agriculture. Whoever's farming there isn't just growing a hay crop. This is GMO, canola, soy, corn. You name it, it has to be profitable. Otherwise, they couldn't afford to do a wheel line because that's a massively expensive piece of infrastructure. So this means you're surrounded by GMOs, meaning they're spraying Roundup from airplanes, all kinds of stuff. You don't want to live near that. And so, but one of the first things I always do when I look at a client's property is I zoom in, and then before I even look at the property, let's say our property's here, I just zoom out like this, and I make some some primary observations here. Okay, first of all, I look at the elevation. So on the bottom right of my screen, it's in metric, 500 meters. So times 3 is in feet. So approximately 1,500 feet above sea level. And I look, okay, we got the Palati River over here, and that is at 475. So here we are, we're 35 meters above that river. That's pretty good. That means most likely this will never, you'll never flood here. So that's a good thing.
But all the runoff from the ag fields going in there.
Well, that's just it. And that's your biggest disqualifier in this area is big ag. And I wouldn't even consider making a hunker down homestead in big ag country. Big ag is so vulnerable. It's a black swan waiting to happen. And the sad thing too is all these farmers are so compartmentalized in, you know Joel Salatin's work. Joel's a personal friend of mine, and I mean I've been reading Joel's books since I was like in my 20s. There's no families here. Like the family farm in the U.S. is over, just like Americana in general is over. The family farm is over, so there's no resilience here. As soon as the supply line of fertilizer gets cut off, and the water becomes contaminated that can't be used, this is a ghost land. This is a ghost town. And there's no vegetation and wildlife here. There's no wild animals. Sometimes you get people that this is smart. If you're going to farm, if you're going to have a cash crop, it's smart to have a portion of your property being completely forested so that you have some filter around you from the externalities in your area as well as from the weather. Trees and stuff like this is a huge windbreak when you're living in areas like this, because ultimately this is in tornado.
That's where those trees are along the field lines there. My grandpa used to have that. They planted these berry bushes all along their property line to stop that wind from rolling in. Not stop it, but just lessen the impact of it. You got to think, no, Curtis, if I might say something, King Corn is a great documentary. If nobody's ever watched this, King Corn, nobody's talking about the subsidies right now. Oh, the subsidies. If we get into a hyperinflationary event and the dollar is not used as a world's reserve currency anymore, the understanding for me is how much subsidy goes into the corn itself to even grow. Like there's no way farmers on this big ag can break even at the prices we're paying them now. They would need a 3x, 4x, even to break even on what you consider farming corn. It's impossible. I know. Once you see the subsidies, wow, then we're done.
Oh, I know it. Well, and I don't want to call myself a bona fide agricultural expert, but agriculture has been my field of work for many years. And I often have these Americans, because most of my clients and people that I work with are in the US, always make fun of Canada for being socialist. And I'm like, have you looked at American agriculture? You want socialism. American agriculture is so socialized that it, as you said, you cannot grow. Most of those farmers in these areas cannot grow without massive subsidies from the USDA. Either the USDA is getting in and giving them grants on specific pieces of infrastructure or things to do on their property, or it's subsidizing inadvertently the use of fertilizers or whatever it is. It's so subsidized that you talk about a black swan. As soon as we go into some kind of attrition, in the sense that when the US dollar starts to slide globally, I think we're still a ways off from it. I mean, it's hard to say when it's going to be, but when that happens, farm country in the US is toast. It will be a ghost town, and it probably turn into a dust bowl like it would naturally be without all that massive center pivot irrigation. And so you don't want to be anywhere near that. You want to be in areas where there's a higher percentage of wild area than ag. And that's why I live in the mountains of southern British Columbia. It's for the exact same reason. I don't want to live in big ag country. I want wild. The advantage we have up here is there's so few people and so much land that at the end of the day, a lot of people will be able to survive in tough times just solely by hunting, because there's so many wild animals. And that's what I prefer, is thinking about it in that way. Yeah, I'll put that screen back if you want to keep.
Moose, those are giant animals. And I may have an answer for you on that. The quickness of the de-dollarization globally will be when the oil and the gold pivot happens, where countries that just start paying for oil and gold, only those two, nothing else, doesn't have to be the corn, doesn't have to be the wheat. As soon as they pivot off to have more sales in UN or some kind of BRICS currency for oil trade and actual physical gold trade, once that happens, the acceleration is going to run away, because those are the two things that are needed most. The energy's got to come directly after the food. Once that oil liquidity goes into the other currencies, it's over, because that was the only reason that we were able to achieve that status, was at the barrel of a gun, forcing everybody to use dollars to buy oil.
Exactly. And you look at the formation of the BRICS and all this stuff, and it's all seemingly falling into place. I wanted to show you.
Well, that's a nice piece. That looks very much like the property in East Tennessee, this area.
This is Eastern Tennessee. And I want to show you this. So when I did this course, these are all the properties. Actually, I'll zoom out for a second and show you something real neat. We profiled, these are all the properties that we profiled in the US, and I'll zoom back into that one because I want to show you want an example of a really cool property I like it because it occurs,
excuse me for interrupting, but when you're trying to drive in there, if you don't know your way, you're going to burn more gas, go around getting lost, and even figure your way out of it.
Exactly. That's why it's so sweet. So anyways, these are all the properties that I did, full evaluations of, but I want to show you this one place in Eastern Tennessee that blew my mind. And it was, I think it's sold, but I think it was about 300,000. And even at current prices, that's not bad for what this is. So you talk about having it all. So I just want to move this thing over here for a second. You talk about having it all. So, the climate in Eastern Tennessee, fairly mild winters, but you can get some fairly decent weather events. You guys get some serious rain, you get some serious wind. And so wind and rain are your biggest kind of, unless this isn't in a flood zone, but those are events stemming from that form of weather are your biggest climate risks in Tennessee in general. But the thing that's so rad about this property is it's like tucked into the base of a knuckle, and where the infrastructure is for the property. And this is 40 something acres. This place has it all. And this is, for me, this is the perfect ratio. And I'm looking at land. I want some amount of productive field. Like I said, if you can have yourself 5 acres or more for homestead, infrastructure, crop, maybe a small cash crop, you're golden. So we've got 6 acres there of productive field down here. So this is the neat thing about this property is that you got your homestead, your zone 1, call it, right in here. You might have a small, you could have a half-acre kitchen garden right in here, nice and easy and convenient to the house. But then you got your crops, so you can run in some sheep out here, maybe a couple dairy cows, and you've got enough field where you could actually do crops for your animals over winter. So it's perfect as far as sustainability, as far as crops and food from the land. Huge on just that alone. But then we pull the lens back a little bit. We've got the other 35 acres, call it, wild, which is so perfect. I mean, better than me as far as what's wild and forageable in Tennessee, but there's a lot in those forests, those hardwood forests, man. Oaks,
hickory nuts, black walnut, this sort of thing.
But also forms of fungus and mushrooms and such.
Oh yeah, turkey tail everywhere.
Wild boar, even. I mean, it's absolutely abundant, this area of Tennessee. But this is the kind of place I like to look, because this kind of place. You want that stream bed coming down. See, that's a rain-fed stream bed right there. So
it is, and
that's exactly it.
But that rain, even though it'll stop raining, just from our streams will still run for 3 to 4 days after the rains stop here. Now they'll slow down.
And that's a sign of soil.
You got to think, if it only rains once a week, you're still able to get water. And then if you could have storage for your water.
Exactly. So when I did an analysis of this property, I identified 2 huge opportunities for ponds. One is up here, which could be really interesting. But another is you have a draw. So by looking at the property this way, kind of zooming in a bit, you get a sense of the topography. You can see that this is a big dish. It's a catchment. And so anytime it rains, water's going to come down, and there's going to be a stream somewhere in here. And it's going to actually move down through the property. And you could probably put a pond in here, or you could dig a trench a bit deeper, maybe a French drain, and bring it out here. And you could store a massive amount of water. And surface water is really good. I mean, I bet you the well water in this area is pretty good too. Because I mean, I zoomed out here, And
And
like, I
there's
mean,
not
this
much
is what
ag
you
in
want.
these kind of hilly areas. It's mainly, it was
Oh,
family farms. Like a big family farm here would have been 500 acres. But you see, like imagine if you own that whole valley there to the south of your property and a little bit to the east and west. Like one family might have owned that 150 years ago, where they bought
that's right.
500,000 acres, and that was that one family that farmed that entire area, but they did it, you know, in a
Yep.
different way that we would today. Also, that drainage that's coming off on the road front there, it's similar to
Beautiful.
my neighbor's property that's more in
Yeah.
front of me. He's planning all, you know, there's a continuous water source because every time it rains, that is going to be a well irrigated spot. So he's chosen a bunch of canna
unbelievable
lilies,
resource.
cattails, and different types of things to front out there, as well as what was he putting, currants and a few. And then I said, oh, currants, I'll take some of those, see how they do. Blueberries and a few other things to make a hedge line because there's very little traffic on his road.
Yeah. So here, check this out, David. So
block it out, to block, give a little more blocking in front, but make it, everything you plant on that property has to be edible. Please, no you know, ornamentals. It got to, everything that touches the soil needs to produce food.
Totally. So check this out. So this is what I always do is I always draw, this is a 60-mile radius.